From the American Society for Microbiology, this is TWiM, This Week in Microbiology, episode 199, recorded on June 23rd, 2019. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you are listening to the podcast that explores unseen life on Earth. Today we're recording in San Francisco, California. We are at ASM Microbe, the big meeting for microbiologists. And joining me today here in San Francisco, the president of ASM, President Michelle Swanson.
Hello, it's wonderful to see you all. Thank you for joining us.
We are so proud that Michelle is president. Can we give her a hand? Isn't that great? For a couple of weeks still, right? And also, sorry?
Just one.
1 week.
July 1st.
Also joining us, Michael Schmidt.
Hello, everyone.
Michael is from the Medical University of South Carolina. Michelle, of course, from the University of Michigan.
Go Blue.
Now,
Supposed to cheer.
of course, who is not here is our wonderful host, Elio Schechter. Elio lives in San Diego. He decided he doesn't want to travel anymore, so he's not here. And we're sad not to have him because he keeps Michael in check.
Yes, he slaps me cross-country to dampen my enthusiasm or encourage it, one way or the other.
So I tried to make this number 200, by the way, but it didn't work out. And so then we had the brainstorm, why not tomorrow go down to San Diego and with Elio record number 200, and that's what we're going to do. And we're going to interview Elio, which I figured he'd say no to, but actually he agreed, because he's got an amazing career. So the three of us are going to fly down tomorrow morning and do that at San Diego State University. So if you're there, you can come check it out. I'll broadcast the location on Twitter.
And if you have any questions for him, tweet them to us, and we'll ask Elio for you.
Yeah, that'd be fun. All right, so this is 199. We have two guests for you today, and we do have a mic there if you have any questions for both of our guests. And anytime, just stand up, and one of us will see you, and we'll call on you. We'll be happy to do that. Our guest is a PhD student at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, working in the laboratory of Dr. Elizabeth Shank. She's the founder and CEO of PH Depression, LLC. That's at thephddepression.com. Please welcome Susanna Harris.
Thank you so much for having me. This is pretty incredible, actually.
I'm glad you could do it. Susanna told me her story a while ago on Gmail, and I said, you have to come on to TWiM and talk about it. But let's briefly start with a little bit of your history. I know you're not from New York City. Where are you from?
So I grew up in Iowa, right in the middle of it, right outside of Des Moines. And then I went to the University of Iowa for undergrad, where I worked with Dr. John Kirby on myxobacteria, if anyone has had the pleasure of working with myxobacteria. And I moved down to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, about 5 years ago to start my PhD down there.
So John Kirby was on TWiM and TWiV. I don't know if you know that.
I don't.
So he was on TWiM 140, which we recorded at Cold Spring Harbor, which was fun, and TWiV 487 most recently at the Medical University of Wisconsin. And Myxococcus, very interesting. Mm-hmm. What did you do after that?
So I just went straight into the PhD, did a few rotations with awesome people in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I love UNC, and I will always rep that department. It's amazing people. I think that's the most important thing, just in grad school and probably science in general, is being surrounded by those people. So now I work on bacterial interactions on the surface of plant roots.
Yeah, the rhizobium, right?
Yeah, so I do some rhizobium. We focus a lot on Bacillus subtilis, which is a just kind of common soil bacteria, but it's been shown to help different plants grow.
We had a conversation Michael and I the other night with Mark Martin about Thor, You must know about Thor, right?
Oh, yes.
Not the guy with the hammer.
So that's kind of related to what
Yeah.
you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're not here to talk about Thor or rhizobium or any of that. You're here to talk about the PhD depression. How do you actually say that?
No, that's a good question. So it was the pH depression, and the reason for that is that it just started as kind of a little social media experience, and I can go into the background of it. But yeah, it's called pH depression because I'm a grad student, I'm a PhD student, I have depression, and was just looking to find a couple people who might have similar experiences, not really thinking it was going to turn into anything much. But because of this issue, actually, we just yesterday changed our name to PhD Balance to try to incorporate more people and make sure that people know, it's not just about the mental illness side, but it's also everyone has mental health and understanding how to support that, especially in an academic environment.
So I thought it was really important for you to tell your story here because I think it's far more widespread than we know. And also I have in my family someone with depression, so I'm very attuned to that. So tell us how you got into this. Tell us your story.
Yeah, so it is a year ago. I guess pH depression started last March, so we've been around for just over a year. And a year ago, if you had told me I was going to be on TWiM in front of a large group of people talking about this, I'm not sure I would have even started the project. But it all came about because there was this Nature Biotech paper by Evans et al. That showed that somewhere between 1 in 4 and getting close to 1 in 2 graduate students were experiencing symptoms of general anxiety disorder or depression. And I happened to be at this conference called ComSciCon. It was a science communication conference. And Monica Filiu-Moher, she's an amazing woman, was saying, find your audience, find your passion, and talk about something. And I looked around this group of 200 people, and I thought, there's no way that 25, 50, probably even 5 of these people would understand where I'm coming from. I couldn't imagine that because I was looking around trying to find what I thought mental illness looked like. And I realized I probably wouldn't recognize myself either. And there was this huge disparity between the statistics we were seeing and just being able to understand that successful scientists look like successful scientists, but you can't see mental illness. And those successful scientists are quite often dealing with that. So you think about this conference, which is what? 3, 4, 5,000 people?
8,000?
8,000 people. I was way off. Even if we use conservative numbers, which is 1 in 4 in academia, that's 2,000 people in this conference who need to know that it can be talked about, that they are successful, that this matters, and that they're surrounded by people who would understand.
So can you tell us your personal story? Now, we have a lovely video that you made, and I think everyone needs to go look at this. Not now, though. Okay. I'll give you the URL. It's on Vimeo. Mm-hmm. And I watched it this morning in my room, and it brought tears to my eyes. So
Yeah.
I'd like you to tell the story, and I promise I won't cry.
No, that's fine. No, I have been told by people to not watch it in public because it can be kind of a bummer. But it has a good ending. So. So during my third year of my PhD, that was probably the darkest part of my life. So at the end of my second year, I failed my written qualifying exam. And this is always different at different universities. But the way that ours work is that you get a second chance to rewrite. We do an off-topic written 6-page grant. Very stressful, can be extremely informative and really a good experience. And I don't want any of this to come across as like, I hate that exam or my department wasn't supportive. But what happened is that I had to rewrite this exam knowing that if I failed, I would be kicked out of grad school. And the way that the exam works is that you get a month off of work. And so the idea is so that you can concentrate, but what ends up happening is that people sometimes get very isolated, and that's definitely what happened for me. And that was what was really hard, is that when I needed to reach out for help, I wasn't around people, and that barrier to entry to just find someone and say, yeah, today's bad, or like no one was around me to see the signs and symptoms that I was going through of just, I couldn't concentrate, I wasn't eating, it was just really hard. But I thought that I would get through this exam and, come out the other side and feel way better, feel like I belonged in academia, feel like I had proven myself. And as I'm sure a lot of the people in the audience know that, you get past one hurdle and you realize that it doesn't suddenly all feel better. And so I got past that, and I was still really depressed. I was still really anxious. I still had a really hard time getting excited about science, felt like I didn't belong there, felt like I couldn't tell anyone because if they saw, in addition to the fact that I had already failed my exam, it would just be so clear that I should not be in grad school. And the thing is that I've struggled with this stuff for as long as I can remember. I also have people in my family who I care very deeply about who have dealt with a handful of mental illnesses. And I sort of just said, if I'm going to do this forever, I just don't want to do it anymore. And, the story on Vimeo, it's also tagged to my my Twitter page. It talks about where I got to that breaking point. Where I didn't just want to quit grad school, I just didn't want to live anymore. And this is a weird thing to say to an audience of people, but I made this decision and started preparing for it. And one of the things that I really wanted to do, my kind of last stopgap was to get a tattoo, because it's something that I really would never do. It's something that my parents wouldn't approve of. And I went in and got this tattoo, and it's on my arm if anyone ever wants to see it. But it's you can maybe see there's a little black spot. It's a little sun in black ink. But if you get closer, it actually in white ink says another sunrise, which was sort of a mantra for me of like, just get to the next day, get to the next bright period. And I got this tattoo, and I just really wanted to see it heal. If you've ever gotten a tattoo, or if you've seen one, they're not attractive at first. They don't look like what you want them to look like. And so I spent that summer waiting for this to heal, and it did get me to that next sunrise. It got me to that next point where I was excited about things again. And so it was about a year after that I started PH depression, because I wish that had existed. I wish that I knew that so many people I could turn to and say, I'm dealing with this. And rather than saying, you shouldn't be here, they would say, oh, me too. Like, let's get a coffee. So that's the whole spiel.
So you, in your video, you talk about early in your life, you had some signs of this. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's certainly not something that was caused by grad school. It was maybe precipitated by grad school. It's a bit of a pressure cooker, and things come out that have existed there for a while. When I was in 6th or 7th grade, my social anxiety was so bad that I couldn't actually speak in front of groups of 3 or more people. And these sort of things are still they're amazing, but they're also kind of awful. These giant conferences, it can be a really tough time. But it was so bad that my parents were considering pulling me out of school. So we went to a therapist. I started taking medications, Zoloft or sertraline. It's just a general anti-anxiety medication, and I worked through that, and I thought that it was over. I got through a tough period, and I thought it was done. And then in high school, there was kind of a tough period that I was, just an angsty high school student. And then in college, everyone tells me college is hard, and I had a really rough time, and dealt with some depression and anxiety and eating disorders. And, I think that it took me a long time, and I always wanted to think that this was the last incident. I wanted to think that I had learned enough and I was smarter than the mental illnesses. And so that's really also where the tattoo came from, is sort of accepting that this is a permanent part of me that I will probably always have to work at and think about, but also accepting that that's okay.
There was a part of your video where you talk about the qualifying exam, and you took it a second time, and it took them a month and a half to give you the result. Now, I'm not going to blame anyone. People make mistakes. But my first thought was maybe we need to be more sensitive with students, because it's a huge pressure thing, and at least get back to them Right? Would that have helped?
I think so. Or just having, realizing that this is so stressful. Some of the feedback I got that wasn't helpful was when people said, well, this is how academia is. You apply for grants, you're going to get shot down. But if you don't get a single grant, it's not that you get kicked out of your career trajectory, And I think that getting back to students is really important. And I do think with these exams, they can be really informative. The second grant I did was not very good, but there's some just tricky things with everything. But I learned a lot. Now my writing is better because of it. On the flip side, I didn't write anything for a year because I would just get to my computer and just couldn't. But yeah, I think understanding those triggers, the sensitivity that students do have, and really where PhD Balance is going now, our mission is to empower students to build their own resilience and reach their potential, because every student I talk to is saying, I really want to be successful. I really want to be as stable and as good a scientist as I possibly can. No one's looking for a handout, but I do think that we need to think about what is going to be helpful for a student. What is the purpose of these sort of hoops? Is it to teach them to write? Is it a rite of passage? And I really think that most faculty members want their students to be successful, right? And I don't know that all students know that. I think that just offering a bit of compassion, saying, thank you for your work, saying, I know you're going through a hard time. Can I get you a coffee? Can we take a walk? And can you tell me how you're doing? I think that would go a really long way.
So one of the highlights of this meeting are these fireside chats. Do you think departments should have the equivalent of a fireside chat before and after the qualifying exam, and maybe during the qualifying exam, just to effectively chat with students, both when they're taking it for the first time, and God forbid, should they have to take it a second time, to build that, if you will, safety valve in to effectively not coddle the student, but just to help them decompress and know that we all went through this, and it's indeed a rite of passage that all of us went through. Everyone standing before us.
We're not all PhDs, but yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we've all been through some sort of rite of passage, though, right? That you're like, oh man, this is a hurdle. Yeah. So actually, what's really exciting and just the most inspiring, the work that I get to do right now. So I am still a PhD student. I've got 1 year left.
She passed.
I passed.
She passed.
I passed all the things. Oh, yay.
There's clapping.
There's clapping.
Because the audience on the podcast can't hear.
It would sound really depressing on the podcast. Yeah, so I passed, and what's really been amazing is that I've connected with fantastic people. I've been able to talk to faculty, to departments, and UNC itself, the micro department, has reevaluated that exam, has changed some things, but I do think that is a fantastic idea, and I'm working with them now to basically create little, not support groups, but basically during the exam have a room in the building that is set up, or maybe twice a week, something like that, have cookies or have some coffee, something like that, so that people can have an out to go in there, and have either a faculty member or someone who is, we all know who the kind faculty members are. A lot of them are nice, but there's some people who are just kind. Having those compassionate people in that room willing to talk. And again, I think the biggest issue was not the exam, but rather that I was so isolated. And one of the big things with mental illnesses is that, one, you're very trapped. It's very hard to reach out for help. And two, a lot of the signs are not apparent unless you're with people. Right? So people will purposely isolate themselves. They'll separate themselves from others because they don't want those signs to show. I think that was one of the biggest issues, is that I wasn't in access to people who really did want to help.
I first have to say I admire you so much, and I really thank you for the work that you're doing. Because of the advocacy, your group and others. Institutions are starting to recognize this as a problem. I'm proud to say that University of Michigan now has a professional counselor embedded in our graduate and postdoctoral office. And we also have a monthly lunch series where people are invited to drop in, get free lunch. There's a counselor there, and they're encouraged to talk with their peers about struggling with balance or homesickness or stress from the PI. So thank you. I think programs like this will benefit a lot of people, and especially our trainees who are especially vulnerable during that period.
So this goes back to something you said. You look at people and you just don't know. So when you have 6 new students coming, and I'm talking as a faculty for a long period, 6 new students come in, you look at them all, you have no idea what's going on, so go take an exam. And there's no kind of personal interaction, which is what we've been talking about here. But I think that's a great idea, to sit down before and after and say, look,
During.
we support you, this is what's going to happen. That would really help. And you were just alone.
Yeah, no, I think that would be really great. The other thing that is really difficult, and this is the thing that I'm running into, and I would love responses from people either here or who's ever listening to the podcast. We talk to grad students, and they say, yes, it's a problem. Either I deal with this or my really close friend does, and I don't know what to do. We talk to postdocs, and postdocs are like, yeah, it doesn't get better. It's postdoc is hard. I'm not a postdoc, but man, y'all are rock stars. You do so much science, and yeah, it can be really lonely. And I talk to faculty, and they say either I have seen it in my students, I have dealt with it, I have family, and quite a number will say, actually, I see a therapist, I take medication, I do those things. Like, it's really common. But then I've asked, do you want to share that? And they say, oh, no. Like, I want people to depend on me, and I don't know if that's going to happen. And it's sort of this question of why do faculty who we look up to, PhD students, we look up to you so hard, whether or not we want to be faculty or we want to go somewhere else, but you are not just our mentors, but in a lot of ways our idols. And it's really hard for us to convince ourselves to be vulnerable when we see you in a position that we see is very stable. I know that you don't. But compared to us, we feel like you have made it. Like, you are the people who are just the top. And it's really hard. And I also get a lot of feedback from students who say, well, how can I be in academia when I look around and none of the faculty have this problem? And I'm like, oh man, yeah, you just don't hear it. So any input from people about how we can create a space where faculty would be comfortable sharing or mentoring or talking about these things, it is really, really hard. I'm comfortable up here on this stage because I've been on a bunch of stages this year, and because I get messages all the time that tell me really that the work is worth it. But that's a space where I just have no idea how to get people going.
Well, you talked about graduate students and postdocs. Faculty also have similar issues. You just don't know it, right? And you're not likely to find out because as you say, I want to be a mentor. I can't let people know about this.
I'm from the Midwest. I want to inject some optimism. I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago, we might have been saying the same thing about the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
We didn't have faculty who would step up and say, I'm an ally, and let's put a group together. So maybe that can be a model, and we can be hopeful that we need to remove the stigma and embrace us for who we are.
Works from the bottom up. These students are going to be faculty, and they will make the change, basically.
And I want to follow Michelle in that, I do think it's getting better, because we are talking about it, because this is a conversation that we're having on TWiM, which has been in my ears for years and years and years while I've been pipetting, right? And I think it's getting better. Your universities really do care. There's so many people in universities, so many faculty who really care. And I love that the conversations are happening. And I see a change happening even over the year. Actually, Michigan is a great place that's doing a lot of work. So, and thank you all for even being willing to have this sort of conversation. It can be really difficult.
Thank you.
Well, I think the take-home message that you want to send out to the podcast world and the audience here is help helps.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you just can't ignore the fact that help helps.
Yeah. Yeah. That it's, we all want to be our best selves as researchers, as students, as academics. And I sometimes see it as reaching out to a collaborator. Like, I don't do bioinformatics. I can barely turn on a computer. But, if I need that support, I find someone who can help me. And my therapist is the same exact way, that she keeps me on track. She helps me with the things that I don't know myself. And she makes me better. And yeah, it's not bad.
So, by the way, the microphone's there if anyone has a question. I have to ask this. It's a dumb question, but I like... Well, actually, there are no dumb questions, but
There you go.
this is never cured, right?
Ooh, that's a good one. Never cured. So people can have one incidence of mental illness, and this can be brought on by a lot of things. So it's not as though if you struggle in grad school or you have this time where you do see a therapist, you do take medication. That's not a life sentence. So there's kind of a spectrum of mental health. Everyone in this room has mental health the same way that everyone in this room has a diet, right? But not everyone is going to deal with the severity of a mental illness or a chronic mental illness. I often use the analogy of asthma, right? Everyone has had a cold. Everyone has gotten sort of chest congestion, and for that period of time, they are sick. They have an illness, and they might need to go to a doctor and get help. But someone with asthma is going to have to deal with these problems time and time again. They have to be more cognizant of their triggers. They have to understand their limitations, and they can do things like run marathons, but they should do it under the guidance of a medical professional. And it really doesn't help when someone comes to them and says, yes, well, I had a cold. Have you considered, walking slower or something like that? So as far as it being cured, I think that, some people get the help that they need and are sort of in remission. So it's not really a cure. There's a bunch of research going on, but at least for a lot of us, for myself, there have been too many times where I've thought that I'm done with this and it sneaks back up, and I just have to acknowledge that it's going to be a thing I deal with.
But one of the things that you learn in therapy is they teach you how to cope, or they teach you to seek help, or they simply say, come see me. And that's one of the important take-homes that you need to know, is when you're getting to that state, intervene.
Yeah. Well, and, I do sometimes get the question of, if everyone in academia is struggling, why do we focus on grad students? And one, I think, we're in a training position. We're trying to get these people to have as much support as they can to be academics, to be successful in the long run. So that's one reason. The other is that across the spectrum of mental illnesses, especially with depression, 75% of people who will deal with a clinical level of depression, a bout of depression, 75% of those people will have that incidence or the first incidence before they're 25. So mid-20s, early 30s is when people are starting to realize maybe a problem is chronic. They are developing those coping mechanisms. And I think this is a really good place to have some intervention, to, instead of telling people to press it down, allow them to learn the right things that are going to make them so much more successful. And, to your point, Vincent, about this is kind of a grassroots movement, and it's as it goes up. But I think that these bad habits also move up the chain. So I think that instilling these good habits, I would love for faculty to think about this as leaving a legacy, not just in their students, but in academia as a whole, is creating an environment where people are overall more successful.
Looks like we have a question.
Ooh.
Hi. I'm a grad student at Harvard Med, and this is something really important that we've also been thinking about in my program. And we have done a lot of thinking similar to you about having support around the qualifying exam, because that's a really important time of stress. But something we've realized through talking to people is it's after the exam too, when all of a sudden the support from your program's a little bit more dispersed. First year you're in classes with your classmates, then you have your qualifying exam where there's a little more structure, and then you're kind of set free into your lab for the next 3 to 4 years where there's not that much support or structure. And we're kind of struggling with how to how do you create a structure or a support system that brings people back together who are dispersed in these labs, around a big campus? And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that. What's a good strategy to get people to say, hey, take time out of your day from your really hard experiment that's long and you just might want to go home to come back to be with your peers and get some support?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really important one, and it's also a very tricky one. We're finding that peer support is really helpful. So having sort of a buddy system, but it seems to be important to actually to match up people, one, in small groups, so that if you don't really match with your original buddy, you still have someone, but two, across years, right? It's better to have someone who's a 5th or 6th year talking to someone who's a 2nd or 3rd year, because also they're not in a competition state of mind. A lot of times in those qualifying exams, you're still trying to prove yourself, you're still in kind of a weird headspace. And I don't know, at least in my department, by the time people are in their 5th or 6th or 7th year, they're just there to get through, to keep going, to hopefully think about the rest of their lives. And those are the people who are willing to reach down and pull people up. And I would also say that, around this time, it can be really helpful actually for your own mental health to be a mentor. To have these people who are mentors, have them also meet and talk about, what are you seeing? What are some issues? Because it does give people the responsibility of taking care of themselves first. And you truly cannot support or take care of anyone else unless you have that equal or higher support for yourself. So any other ideas, I definitely welcome them. Yes.
I'd suggest that every department can have a graduate level and postdoc level association with a budget, so that group can get together, plan some social outings, have invited speakers, maybe scientists, maybe somebody to talk about health and wellness. Mm-hmm. That's something that every institution could do and should do.
Yeah, and I love the idea about doing fireside chats, that Michael brought up, of having faculty come on and just have these conversations, because sometimes what happens, right, is you have a conflict with your mentor, whether or not anything that can be, and it can be nice to have other faculty connections where you feel a personal and professional connection.
Another question?
Hi. So I am a survivor. I have a similar story here. Mm-hmm. And Susanna is a hero because after surviving, she's doing outreach and try to help. And I got friends. I got a friend at MIT who started the Fail conference, where he's inviting people who failed, like George Church, for example, to explain to students, hey, failure is fine. You don't have to kill yourself, just as MIT students usually end up to do. 25% of MIT PhD students kill themselves. And that was a rate that for us European was like, okay, though, what's going to happen? But I am also, I want to ask to the higher level people, do you see some support from the top down? Because heroes can do only as much from the bottom up. And, there shouldn't be a situation where some university have these departments of counseling and mental health and some others don't. So if you end up in one of those, you don't get anything. So is there, at a national level or even at these huge association like ASM, a global outreach to inform universities, institutions, research institutions of this problem, and then try to implement an approach from the top down?
Well,
I think it starts with
Go ahead.
total wellness, and mental health is but a bit of wellness. We've all developed gyms and wellness centers on our campuses for graduate students. At my institution, the graduate students get a membership to the wellness center, which is in the old days called the gym. And I think we need to make certain that mental health is considered part of wellness. And it's got to be an active component. I mean, the statistic or the embarrassment that 25% of the graduate population at MIT kills themselves is not a badge of honor.
I'm not sure that that's the right.
Well, that's what you said.
Not 25%.
It's got to be lower than that, but it is likely to be 25% considerate. So a study at UNC just a kind of a climate survey to figure out what people are dealing with, found that in any 2-week period, the graduate students in the Biological Biomedical Society program, that 10% of them in the last 2 weeks had considered suicide. It's 1 in 10 have thought actively about, do they want to be here anymore? That's a lot. It's a lot.
I want to answer this. I don't know the answer, but if you build a building with federal funds, it has to have certain safety requirements, right? If the NIH pays for a new floor, you have to build it a certain way. In a similar way, they should ensure that every program has these kinds of checks on mental health issues. I think that's where it has to come from. And only because of people like Susanna making noise, and people will find out, and eventually it gets done. But this is a start, right? We are out of time, but I do want to just say one thing. First of all, if people want to get in touch with your organization, what should they do?
Yeah, so because we just changed our stuff, you can find us at phdbalance.com, or you can email us at email@phdbalance.com. And we're also on Twitter and Instagram at phd_balance. And you can always get in contact with me. My DMs are open. It's at Susanna, Susanna, the letter L, Harris, Harris, and that same name is at gmail.com if you want to send me an email instead.
And we'll add those to the show notes that live on the webpage with this episode.
And her video, you need to watch this. 11 minutes, right?
11 minutes.
Vimeo.com/286-214-085. Vimeo is wonderful with this stuff, right? Vimeo.com 286-214-085. I normally wouldn't do this, but it's really good. You need to watch it. So go off somewhere and watch it. Susanna, Harris, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck.
Thank you all. This was amazing.
Yeah, I pulled it back for you. All right, our next guest, and we do have two for you today. He is chief of the Infectious Diseases and Microbiology IRG at the Center for Scientific Review at NIH. Please welcome Alex Politis. Is that a good way to say it?
That's correct.
Thank you.
It's
Welcome.
not politis, because that's some kind of inflammatory condition. So that's
a good way not to remember how not to pronounce it. Before we talk about your index cards there, I wanted to first explore your history a little and find out how you ended up to be in this position. Where are you from?
So I got a bachelor's degree in biology. Had to figure out what I wanted to do next, like most people. Decided to go to graduate school. Started with a parasitology lab. Didn't really like the parasitology. I liked more physiology, so this parasitologist was wonderful. It was at Florida State University. And he put me up into the University of Maryland to a comparative physiologist, which is what I really wanted to do. So I got my PhD in cell biology and comparative physiology. Osmoregulation is what really the topic was. And then when I wanted to go to do a postdoc, I said, I'm not doing this. There's no money. No one's funding comparative physiology. So I said either neurobiology or immunology were the two things that I really thought were hot stuff. And the immunologist called me first. So I did a postdoc with Stephanie Vogel at Uniformed Services University. And talk about a mentor, she's spectacular. And so then she said, what do you want? I said, I want to be able to teach immunology when I get out of this. She said, what do you know now about immunology? I know cell biology, nothing about immunology. She said, we can do that. So I did a postdoc in macrophage biology, and it was wonderful. It was not stressful. By the way, I want to applaud Susanna's courage. That's the only way I can describe it. It's courage to be able to not just notice the problem but pursue it. It's really impressive.
And generosity to share it
yes.
with others who could benefit.
But I wanted to say, not all postdocs are wickedly stressful. It was maybe my favorite time in my career doing postdoc. Then I went into industry. I worked at Human Genome Sciences for a little while, again as a macrophage biologist. And then I went into the Journal of Immunology as an editor. So I had a sordid past. And then I was there as assistant editor for a few years, and this job at the NIH came up, and it was like reviewing manuscripts on steroids, because now I'm reviewing grant applications, which the intensity is clearly higher.
The big stack of dollars behind you, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a story that
Wheelbarrows.
that made it really clear. So I worked for, I don't know if Peter Lipsky is in the audience, but Peter Lipsky was the editor in chief of JI, and so I worked with him for 3 years. Talked to him every day, almost every day, and I would call him and I would get his secretary, and then I never got him on the phone. He always called me back, and sometimes it was a few minutes later, sometimes it was the next day, but I never got him. First round of review, his application was on my desk in my study section. And there was a problem with it that I had to talk to him about. So I called him. I got the same woman on the phone. She said, "Hi, how are you? You know, we've been talking every day for 3 years." And she says, "Yeah, he's right here."
Amazing.
I knew then how important this job was. Anyway, then I applied for this SRO job. I started out in the immunology review group in '98. And then 4 years later, I became the chief of the infectious disease integrated review group, where I am now.
So I can't place your accent. Where are you from?
New York, just north of New York City.
Like Westchester type place?
Yeah, Putnam.
Putnam, okay. And you went to high school and all that. Where'd you go to college?
State University of New York at Cortland.
Ah, we used to go to Cortland. I went to Cornell. We used to go to Cortland to have fun.
It's a lot of bars.
Yeah. So what do you do as the chief? What does IRG stand for?
So IRG is the Integrated Review Group. So it's a collection of study sections that's obviously connected by science.
Okay. And what is your job?
So I am an SRO. I am a scientific review officer, so I do review still. But I manage a group of a dozen scientific review officers and support staff. 8 chartered study sections in my group, and a number of others as small business panels and recurring panels, fellowships.
So each of these study sections is run by an SRO.
Yes.
So do you still do that? Do you still run a study section?
So it's varied over the years. When I first started, I ran a panel that is now non-existent called MBC2. Some of you may remember that one. And I knew just enough molecular biology to be dangerous, so that was a hard one. I learned a lot about more prokaryotic issues that I never dreamed of. Then I did fellowships for a long time. I did a clinical panel for a few years. And now I'm doing sort of these special emphasis panels here and there.
So on average, how many panels will an SRO do in a typical month?
Well, it's not in a month. It would be in a review round, 3 rounds a year. It depends on how many applications. So there are some panels that have a lot of applications. That's pretty much all they do. There's some that don't have as many, and they'll do a special emphasis panel for. There's a lot of conflict rules, so we have to deal with small panels.
Can you give us a ballpark? I'm just trying to envision the pace that the SROs work at.
So I guess maybe the average is 2. You know, they'll have their own panel, which is of moderate size, and they'll run a small special panel in addition to that.
So you came here because you have a presence on the exhibit floor, right?
Yeah, we have a booth.
And you tell us what's going on at the booth.
So it's the purpose is really outreach, and this is really part of that. And I've been doing outreach since before I was a chief. It's been really fun to go and talk about how peer review works and navigate the complicated black box about what happens. And I mean, the overall goal is that we want good ideas to be represented well We don't want to lose good ideas because of things like grantsmanship, or they missed the deadline, or they didn't do it right. That's silly, right? We don't want to do that. So the NIH wants the best science to be funded, period. So I think this outreach is a no-brainer. We need to do as much as we can. In fact, the director, when I first started, was Ellie Ehrenfeld, and she said, so how do you feel about this outreach? Because she asked me to do one for the allergy and immunology people. And I said, I really like doing it. And I said, I don't know why we don't do more of it. We need to do more of it. You know, you're paying for us to go to this meeting. The burden on us is rather minimal in terms of giving a talk or a mock study section. There's a little bit of burden, but most SROs want to do it. And you get out information that absolutely is needed. Myth busting, I would say, is the biggest part of it.
I have to say, when I was first starting, it seemed like a black box to me. I just submitted grants, and they went into it and came back, and I didn't have a face. I didn't have anyone. So I'm glad that you're doing this.
I think the expression is you throw it over the transom and you pray.
Yes,
But
indeed.
now there's so much information available on your websites to guide.
There is, and
PIs.
it's not just CSR. For instance, NIID is the institute that typically you would think of in this panel, not the only one, but they've gone a long way to describe grantsmanship issues and innovative ways of doing peer review. They've really been a good partner with us.
I have to say, when I started, and you as well, there was no website of anything, right? You had to call people, and that was always hard for me to call people and talk to them. It's just, I'm happy to have websites now. So, Alex, in your hand, you have some information that you gleaned at your booth. So tell us what that is.
Topics.
So Tamara McNeely is the one that got me on the show, and I am honored.
Is she here?
Back there
She's
somewhere.
here.
It's here.
Thank you.
I said, boy, I've always wanted to be on. No.
You can say that.
In the past year or so, after getting some blood work done, saying I need to lose weight, I started walking a lot. I've been listening to This Week in Meteorology ever since. I'm in microbiology. It's 83.
We get confused.
It's 83 degrees now in Bethesda. I just wanted to let everyone know. And that's not because I'm in Bethesda, it's because I looked on weather maps.
Of course.
But Tamara put in some interactive forms to what is normally a pretty dull booth. And it basically just raised questions, and it got people to talk to us about what they wanted to talk about, and even though they didn't necessarily know what they wanted to talk about. But we could prod them and say, well, what is your career status? Where are you? What are you interested in doing? And then we talked about things. And often we're giving them information that I'm clear they don't know and that they need to know.
So you're sort of having a fireside chat with them without calling.
It very much is, yeah. But it's been really fun. So I sit there, and I'm right now doing referral for my review group. So applications come in, and I have to put them in study sections. I thought I'd be able to get more done, but there's lots of people that are asking questions, and it's been really fun. We really like doing it.
So this is an unusual TWiM because both topics and your topics are suggested by our listeners, and that I love it. I just love when people get involved and say you should do this or that, and I want people to do it more. Listeners suggest things for us to do, not just papers, but topics or other things. So tell us some of the things you found out.
So one of the things that we did was that we had these cards to try to retrieve information about what people wanted, not just for future outreach events, but to answer the questions on this podcast.
Okay.
So there were several questions or responses that really belong to program officers. So I didn't choose those. And so you should know, first of all, that the peer review system is a two-step process in which peer review, the assessment of merit of the application comes in. That's what we do. And then it goes into the institute that would consider funding it. And program officers manage that aspect of it. So there really is there's a collaboration there, and I try not to get in their way, and they typically don't get in my way. So
maybe next year we can have a program officer on TWiM.
Probably be good.
Is there a head of all the program officers, kind of like you?
Well, in NIID, there's more than one chief. It's a broader situation than
Okay.
It's like this meeting.
Very much, yeah. So anyway, I picked out some cards that I thought were either the most frequent or the might be the most helpful. So first of all, the most of the people that came to talk to us were junior. Most of them were either
Like me,
graduate students
like me,
or
right?
postdoctoral students. Yes.
Junior, like Vincent.
And so a lot of them asked about this, quote, ECR program, or how can you become a reviewer? Because there is truth in this adage that says if you sit on a panel, you will be enlightened about how this works, and it will change how you write your next grant application, and that's very, very true. So I've been there for 21 years. I always I try to get new reviewers and give them a light load and target their science directly so that, and they come away thinking, oh, that's how it works. Not only do they feel more comfortable that it's thorough, which is what we're proud of, it's fair, but they know what is going to aggravate reviewers, and they know what is going to excite them. And then they have a sense of how to go about doing that. In fact, when I give my outreach talks, which we usually have a program officer and a reviewer to answer questions, I show 3 pictures of real reviewers at study sections. and they don't know it, so I don't say anything. And they're real pictures, and I say, the point is that people review your grant application. So this is not a wordsmith search. This is people doing this. And the first one is a picture of a guy that is almost asleep. And I said, don't bore the reviewers. And the second one is, I swear he had a toothache or something. He looks like he's in pain. I said, don't annoy the reviewers. And then the third one is a fellow that's just standing up.
He's delighted with the grant.
And the SRO is standing behind him. It was one of my SROs taking notes, standing up. And it looks like they're about to cheer. I said, this is the image you need to burn into your brain that you want to excite someone. Because if you get that response, they will tolerate, and you guys can confirm this for me, they'll tolerate the little idiosyncrasies of the application. Whereas if you don't get excited,
The Oxford
you're
comma.
done. It's just, whatever. So anyway, these are the things. So the first one was about early career reviewers, and that's a program that basically codifies something we've been doing for a long time, which is to try to get new reviewers. But it takes it a step further. It is for individuals that are in independent research positions for 2 years and that have some publishing background. They don't have an R01. They can have other grant applications funded, which is great. But they can't have an R01, which is what's really different than what we used to do. You had to have the R01 when we did it. You apply, although it's not competitive. You submit your information onto a website, which is all the information is back there. You can go onto CSR's website and find it easily. You provide the information that verifies that you're eligible, and you give some information about your expertise, even which study sections you believe would fit best. Once you're accepted into that, then you go into a database where the scientific review officers have access, and every scientific review officer for every chartered panel and many of the other panels use one ECR every round. It's probably not enough to take care of the database, but it makes a dent. And so what I tell people, so this is the part that you're not going to find anywhere else. The suggestion that you ping the SRO after you get on the database, not before. Because then they look you up and they can't find you, and then they get aggravated. But once you're on there, about 8 weeks before the next study section meeting, the SRO's frame of mind is looking for reviewers, and they're primed. They're ready.
Desperate.
Yeah, they're ready to do it. And so basically, it's a way of sort of getting you at the top of the list. So that's
8 weeks.
That is a great
about 8
tip.
weeks
Okay.
before the.
All right, you heard it first on TWiM.
Since this is the YouTube generation, have you ever thought about doing a YouTube video of the bored guy, the aggravated guy, and the delighted guy, so that the folks can hear?
I'm not
the
sure I should have
conversa-
presented it on the TWiM, frankly.
The answer is no, Michael.
Yeah.
We have mock study sections, but they're never sarcastic like that. So that probably
Yeah.
would be
Okay.
interesting. So that's the ECR program. That was maybe the most common interest that we had from our. There were several questions on grantsmanship in general that I thought were that I can't go through all grantsmanship, but my suggestion for grantsmanship is to certainly talking to an SRO that's seen I don't know how many thousands of reviews I've seen, but that's one perspective of grantsmanship. I have a sense of what aggravates reviewers and what excites them.
And as an SRO, do you appreciate hearing from investigators, or would you rather they not contact you directly about
reviews.
Well, no, before they've submitted the grant. Is this appropriate? Do you have any advice?
So I think our role is to explain the process when it's needed. That's part of the job. To try to do referral, which is another question about which study section it should go in. We should talk about that. And the problem that I have with referral is when they call me ahead of time, they'll say, well, I'll send you the aims, and then you can tell me which one it is. And I say, well, no, I won't be definitive. They say, why not? Because you're going to change the aims. I know it. But what I do is I tell them it's basically a rehashing of what's in the guidelines, and the guidelines are up to date and they're useful. But I can say, this might be a little bit more into this panel or that panel, even if it's not in my group. And I say you should go look those up. And basically, we tell them, if you're confident of a suggestion for a study section, then put it in. But if you don't get the study section you want, or you have a change of heart and you get the one you want, you don't want it, call us. But don't wait, because we don't have that much time after the applications are submitted. We got to get it into the right panel. So referral is an important part, and we take that seriously. So one of the questions in the grantsmanship I thought was a good one, was how important are preliminary results in getting any grant? And it's not like a one-word answer, right? So R21s, probably some of you are familiar with those. Preliminary data is not required, but if you see the R21 applications,
They all have it.
if you don't have it, you better have an idea that's just going to knock their socks off. It's my attitude. And in fact, it's somewhat controversial because some of the ICs want to have applications without preliminary data, but they don't know how to exactly put this thing together.
Why don't you just take it off? Because saying you don't need data isn't. You do. You can't get one without it.
So my suggestion was, part of the problem was, they say, well, we'll just ban preliminary data. And my question was, who's going to implement that?
Yeah.
And I said, one way of doing it is make it a one-pager. And say, no graphs, no figures,
One page application?
One-page application.
I would love that. Do it.
For an R21 for 2 years?
Yeah.
This is great.
Well,
reviewers would like it.
They didn't listen to me.
You would get flooded with one-pagers. Unintended consequence.
I think we could adapt to a review process to screen them out.
So right now it's 6 pages, right?
So preliminary data.
6-point font.
No. Preliminary data in R01, the more standard thing, is absolutely a requirement.
Right.
I would say mostly, you've reviewed many times, for feasibility is certainly one of the aspects of preliminary data that you need to establish.
Yeah.
So another one was referral, and we talked a little bit about referral. And so I would just say, the question was, how do you change panels? And some people send a note directly to our Office of Receipt and Referral, but that's indirect, because if it's going to go into my review group, I'm the one that you got to talk to. And I won't put an application into a study section where it's not going to be appreciated or where the expertise is not normally there. And I'm not going to ask the SRO to go out and get the expertise that's sitting across the hall, even if you want it there. But it influences my decision. So oftentimes there's more than one study section that could fit, and you have a reason that you don't want to tell me, and that's okay, why you don't want it in a particular panel. I'll put it in a panel that's reasonable, and I try to do that. The key is try to know the panels, their guidelines, and act promptly after the assignment is made. So there was a question about, can the SRO or the program officer help you write your grant application?
Reasonable question.
For the low sum of.
So one of the answers that one of my SROs goes, sure, if you don't want it funded. But the reality is that we are asked as SROs, for instance, I got my summary statement back, I'm going to fix this. Can you tell me how to fix it? And my answer is no, because then I can't review it again. All of a sudden, I become a vested
Conflict.
interest. That's a conflict. So no, you can talk to your program officer about how to interpret those critiques and how to approach a revision. That's perfectly reasonable. But I certainly wouldn't ask the program officer to co-write an
Of course.
application.
But what do you think about this practice, which is increasing, that people are using professional grant writers? Is that okay with you, or does it kind of at the core bother you?
So I would say there's some controversy about that, and I've had arguments with reviewers about it. So for instance, if you have a scientist where English is not their first language and they're struggling to communicate, my attitude is all I care about is the idea. And they say, well, no, they don't deserve. I said, no, it's not a competition in that form. It's not a prize for that form. We wanted the best idea to be funded, and if they can produce publications, which obviously they have help with, why are you throwing out good ideas?
good idea.
That's not right. So that's my.
Got it.
I don't know if that's an NIH opinion, but that's my.
All opinions today are yours, not the government's, right? Okay.
So someone asked a really good question about innovation. That was one of the criteria for many of the R grant applications, and there really is an issue with innovation. There's a misnomer that innovation only means technical. You have to have a new way of looking at something or a new way of measuring something, and that is innovation. But conceptual innovation is very common and maybe just as valuable. I mean, it depends obviously on what the innovation is. So we tell the reviewers when we see a comment, a weakness in the innovation, saying, well, they're using state-of-the-art microscopy, but there's nothing new here, bad score. We go to the reviewers and say, stop, don't do that. Is there any conceptual innovation? Because if there isn't any conceptual innovation, I mean, it probably should be dead in the water, right? So I thought that was a good question, but try to clarify innovation. One of my favorite questions, who controls the reviewers?
Tamara.
So I don't know the answer to that. If you're religious, I suppose you might have an answer to it. But the SROs may try, but it's we're not omnipotent.
People. What are you going to do?
We try. There were a bunch of questions about jobs at CSR or really at NIH, and my answer really is that it varies among institutes about what they're looking for. But at CSR, we would not hire a postdoc. And I always tell people I would put myself in this category. I wouldn't be ready for the job as a postdoc. There may be some that are, but not common. It really takes some maturity, I think, to deal with with PIs and reviewers. So typically, at CSR we would start at a GS 13, which is essentially an assistant professor with some years of experience. That's sort of the level that we would start at. We get people that are even more senior, much more senior than that.
Just to clarify, GS13 refers to what level in the funding system of the
pay scale.
NIH?
What's the highest GS?
Government.
Highest GS is 15.
15.
And when I started as a GS 12, but they didn't have you were allowed to hire it as a GS 12, and I moved up to a 14, and IRG chief is a 15. So let's see. That's really about jobs. Oh, someone about jobs wrote, "How did you achieve this marvelous position?"
To you.
So thank you, whoever wrote that. They must have been talking to one of my SROs who was really excited about it.
They're all smiling off in the audience for those of you listening.
Yeah, they're my gang right there.
Oh,
And there's a gang.
You're embarrassing them.
They're blushing now.
So some people did write about when are they eligible to write grants, etc. And some of that is more programmatic than us, but we have a couple of posters, one on general peer review issues and one on fellowship reviews. And fellowships was a very common question. Mm-hmm. So if you have questions about fellowships, come and talk to us, because I reviewed fellowships for 10 years, and Tamara is now currently reviewing our fellowships, and so we have a good sense of how to do that and what to put in those applications.
In fact, I think she often asks me to review it, and I always say no, because I'm doing this. I'm sorry.
So there was one question that I thought belonged to you guys. It's sort of a philosophical question. Let's try to read it, and maybe you guys come up with an answer. It says, what do you wish, this is from a graduate student who is interested in fellowships and early career funding. What do you wish you knew about how to be successful in your microbiology career when you were in graduate school? What advice would you give your graduate student self?
I think Michelle should go first.
The best advice I ever got was from my first mentor, Sam Silverstein, a macrophage biologist, and that was get the best training you can at every stage. Keep your eyes open for opportunities. Figure out what it is you're good at and what you love to do, and go for it.
Michael?
Write clearly.
So it's something we didn't know back then, right? Because someone told me day one, make sure you pick the best mentor for you. And that stuck with me ever since. But I knew that. And you'd like to know something that I didn't know back then. So I think having passion and curiosity, which I don't know if I did back then. I learned that many years later. That in itself.
Following your interests.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, just want to know. Curiosity. You want to know all the answers about anything. Don't think that something is boring, because it never is, right?
And a sense of urgency. I have to know the answer.
Yes, exactly.
And in today's world with the internet, where you can literally find out anything with just a few keyboard strokes, it's really quite empowering.
What's that?
What was that?
Except for
Except for
paywall.
paywalls. That is indeed true.
Yeah, that's another- that's
open
another
access. Open access is addressing a lot of those issues, and NIH has been one of the leaders in that field.
Yeah, I agree with you. It'll be solved one day, but it's not solved yet. So that's all your cards now, right?
So there was one issue about fellowships.
Yeah.
In fact, it even came up with Susanna in terms of, I've seen a lot of fellowship reviews, and one of the tips that I always tell people is make sure your mentor, your sponsor, provides a customized training plan. So
Yeah.
we have these training plans that say the graduate student is going to go to meetings and they're going to journal club and
Take classes.
and you know and we have a nasty word for that. It's called generic, a generic training plan. So what the reviewers want is, and this answers to some of the things that Susanna was talking about. They're looking for sponsors that are going to nurture their mentees. And they see that by saying they know what their strengths are, what they can do better. They match it with their interests. They put them in, real situations where they're going to learn how to do whatever it is, bioinformatics or whatever it is, or even formal classes or whatever. It comes through those applications, and the training plan is huge.
So you have to tailor it to the trainee.
Customized, yeah, absolutely.
All right, since you mentioned Susanna, we had a question here before, and my answer was that the NIH should have a top-down approach to support healthy mental health of its trainees. And I don't know if you can answer this, but is that ever going to happen, do you think?
So those are kind of things that happen slowly,
Yes.
clearly. And this is a good way to start it. Fellowship programs there are some common themes, starting with salaries for F-32s, for instance, and ethics training. That's a really good example of saying everyone needs to have this training, to et cetera. It could fit in with that category, in my opinion, but there's an administrative hurdle there to have that happen.
Well, they could at least, in the section where you have to describe the facilities that are available, the resources that are available,
Yes.
that could be one of the categories.
It's a great idea.
Especially for T32 applications. Considering
I'm
the
less
overall.
familiar with T-32s, but I know about them, but we don't review them. But in the facilities, the environment, they do put in programs that help exactly like this, but programs that help them succeed. And reviewers do see that. But it's not like what you're suggesting is saying, in order for you to be eligible to receive an F-32, that's the way that I heard it, you need to have some minimum standard, which I think would be good. But
Okay. All right.
are
That's,
there questions?
Any other questions? We have time for one quick question. Going once.
Oh,
Here we go.
Go to the microphone.
It wasn't a plant either. I was hoping you wouldn't read my cards, and they were all in my handwriting.
I didn't see them. Go ahead. Yes.
Hi. So I applied to an F-31, and one of the big complaints that I got, my advisor, he didn't have tenure yet, and he was a junior faculty, and it was mostly about his funding, and because he only had small R21 grants and didn't have an R01, and they were only for 2 years. That was a big comment that I got in my application. So.
Okay, so it's pretty common. The first issue is that these fellowships do not pay for research materials, mice, things like that. It's only stipends for salary. So the requirement is that there is money available. It is typically from the sponsor's grant, but you can have a letter from the chair of the department saying that I'm going to support that work if X and Y doesn't come through. So that's one thing, is that they need to be confident that you're not going to go into a laboratory where you might have salary, but you can't do your research because the money's not there. So that is a fundamental component. The other thing is about junior faculty, and not just the funding, but do they have the experience to train? And I would say it is very common and appropriate for a junior faculty sponsor to have a co-sponsor, not just in name, but to say this person is going to play the following role, and that person needs to have experience in training, whether it be pre-docs or post-docs. That typically solves that issue. If the person doesn't have a track record of training, it's harder for them to get excited about confidence that it's all going to work out. It's a great question, actually.
All right, that is TWiM 199. Most of you probably listen on your phone or some kind of portable device with a podcast player, and you can subscribe to us. It's free. You get every episode. We want you to subscribe because that way we know how many people are listening, okay? And that's important for us. If we want to support the show with, say, advertising, we need to tell them how many listeners we have. So please subscribe. If you have questions or comments, twim@microbe.tv. And if you really like what we do, consider supporting us financially. We do this on our own dimes for the most part with very little support, and your support would help us to do more. You can go to microbe.tv/contribute. We have mechanisms through PayPal and Patreon where you could say give $1 a month. $1 a month, $12 a year. $1 a month. You can't buy a cup of coffee for $1 a month. Give it to us, and we will give you not just TWiM, but 5 science podcasts by scientists like us with real science. No fake science, all real science in them for $1 a month. That's a great deal, probably the greatest deal on the planet today. So microbe.tv/contribute. I want to thank our guests today, Susanna Harris from UNC Chapel Hill. Please look at her video, and if you have issues that you want to address, go to her website. Check it out. It's for you. Alex Politis is at the NIH. Thank you, Alex. That was fun.
I had a great time. Thank you very
Good.
much.
Thank you.
We'll bring you back.
I'd love to be back.
Michelle Swanson's at the University of Michigan. Thank you, President.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Michael Schmitz at the Medical University of South Carolina. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Vincent, and thanks everyone for attending.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. I want to thank, yes, sir. I forgot, yes. Oh, thank you, Michelle. So Mark Martin brought us some gifts made by his partner. Remember her name?
It'll come to me.
Quinn.
Quinn.
What's the first name?
Adriana? No.
Dr. Quinn. That's it, Dr. Quinn. She made us these 3D printed TWiM badges.
She's going to become the president of the Mathematics
Yeah, she's a
Society.
mathematician. So these are bacteria that glow in the dark. So you turn out hey, can you turn out the lights? Nobody ever listens. It will glow in the dark. Isn't that cool? And I have one to give to Elio tomorrow when we go do number 200.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Mark Martin.
Also known as the first exponent, since his wife is becoming the president of the Mathematics Society, he maintains he should be called the first exponent.
That's good. I like that. I want to thank ASM Microbe for having us back again and for their support of TWiM. I want to thank Ronald Jenkins for the music that we have on TWiM, and I would like to thank our amazing producer, Ray Ortega. He's amazing. He edits every episode. It's the only one of the podcasts that he does. You can tell it's the best audio quality. And here at ASM Microbe, he runs the whole show. Thank you, Ray. You're amazing. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time on This Week in Microbiology.
Thank you.